What if the most powerful move you could make right now is to stop fighting? What if heaven has already declared, "Stand back, I'm taking over this battle," and you just haven't heard it until now? Chosen one, lean in. This moment isn't just a coincidence. It's a divine appointment. There's a holy silence stirring in the heavens, and in the midst of it, one command is echoing louder than your fears, your fatigue, or your frustration. Stand back. I'm taking over this fight. Can you feel that? Can you sense that something powerful is shifting in the unseen? For too long, you've been carrying weights that were never yours to bear, trying to defend yourself from lies, explain yourself to people who never truly listened, hold together what others tore apart, and push forward even when your soul was running on empty. But now, the war strategy has changed. The Almighty Judge, the commander of angel armies, is rising to take your place on the battlefield, not because you're weak, but because the fight has reached a realm only He can conquer. If something inside you leaps at this word, don't scroll past. Drop 777 in the comments as a prophetic act of surrender and agreement. And to everyone who's been supporting this ministry through super thanks, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Your love, generosity, and faith are what keep this message reaching souls around the world. May God return it to you 100-fold. But listen closely. This isn't just a message to make you feel better. This is a divine command to reposition yourself. Exodus 14:14 says, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Stillness isn't weakness. It's warfare by trust. And when you stop trying to win in your own strength, you make room for heaven to move in undeniable power. The enemies who mocked you, the voices who slandered you, the traps set in secret, they're about to witness something they never expected, God Himself stepping in. So, stay close, chosen one. Because in the next moments, we're going deeper into what happens after God takes the battlefield. And believe me, what He's about to do will silence every voice that ever doubted who you are. God's chosen ones. God commands. Stand back, I'm taking over this fight. They didn't just go after your name, they went after your character, your heart, and your sacred silence. Yet not once did God instruct you to retaliate. He never told you to speak out in defense or prove your innocence. Instead, He gave you one powerful command that echoed into your spirit. Stand back. I'm taking over this fight. That wasn't just a whisper. It was a divine interruption in your chaos. And when heaven speaks, chosen one, the wise listen, even if it hurts. You weren't imagining the betrayal. You didn't make up the distortion of your truth. The tears were real. The confusion was suffocating, and the humiliation. It wasn't some test of emotional resilience. It was a spiritual test, one designed to separate those who react from those who obey. Do you remember that moment? When someone you once interceded for twisted your name in rooms you were never invited into. That quiet pain of knowing the ones you stood up for didn't stand up for you. What makes this more heartbreaking is how familiar it feels, like the story of Joseph, sold into slavery by the very brothers he once dreamed with. And yet, through the pit, through the prison, God never told him to fight back. The betrayal wasn't a detour. It was the path to the palace. And if I can be honest with you, this message hits close to home for me too. I've lived through the sting of false accusation. I've had seasons where the people I thought would protect me were the ones who let the wolves in. But looking back, I see it now. My silence was not weakness. It was worship. It was trust. It was a surrender that said, God, I won't touch what you said you'd handle. You see, the world clapped for the ones who hurt you. They celebrated their cruelty like it was bravery. And still, you said nothing. And in that nothing, God was working. While they shouted, God surrounded you with something louder. Stillness. That holy stillness he once gave the Israelites as they stood paralyzed before the Red Sea, with death behind and uncertainty ahead. And God said through Moses, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." That wasn't a suggestion. It was a strategy, and you followed it. Have you ever wondered why God didn't let you respond? Why he silenced you when your truth was boiling in your chest? Because he was preparing something bigger. He wasn't just shielding your image. He was preserving his glory. He didn't want your fingerprints on this fight. He wanted the victory to be so undeniable that even your enemies would say, "Only God could have done this." Think about someone like Nelson Mandela, falsely imprisoned for 27 years, yet he didn't come out seeking revenge. He came out carrying a vision for peace. Why? Because God used his silence and suffering to rewrite the course of a nation. Mandela's restraint became his roar. His stillness became his strategy. And in your life, God is doing the same. Every lie spoken against you became a weapon heaven disarmed. Every whisper only made your anointed silence louder. And just like David, who refused to lift his hand against King Saul, even when the perfect opportunity came, your obedience has become your most dangerous weapon. Can you feel it now? This was never about revenge. This was about revelation, a divine unveiling of who you really are. God hasn't overlooked a single moment. He isn't indifferent. He's sharpening his sword. And when he rises on your behalf, the very ones who mocked your restraint will tremble at the roar of your restoration. You won't even have to lift a finger, because this fight, this one, is God's chosen one. Can you see it now? The battle around you was never about a specific mistake you made. It was about the divine weight you carry. Some wars were stirred in silence long before you ever opened your mouth. Why is it that your very presence makes certain people nervous? Have you ever walked into a room and felt the atmosphere shift, even when you hadn't said a word? It's because what you carry shines too brightly for their shadows to remain comfortable. Your light exposes what others are trying desperately to keep hidden. It's not pride they see in you, it's purity. But in a corrupt world, even purity feels like provocation. Have you noticed how often those who loudly promote peace are the first to stir conflict when you're near? Why do people misread your humility as arrogance? It's because their hearts aren't at peace, and your stillness reminds them of it. This isn't new. They did the same to Daniel. His integrity was so threatening to the corrupt officials of Babylon that they created laws just to trap him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't rebellious. He was faithful. He simply prayed 3 times a day, just as he always had. And yet they conspired to throw him into the lion's den. But what happened? God shut the mouths of the lions and exalted Daniel publicly. Can you imagine what those men felt as they watched the one they tried to silence walk out untouched? God is doing the same for you. You didn't need to raise your voice to silence their schemes. You didn't need to fight to be seen. God never asked you to clear the smoke. They created it, and he's the one who will blow it away. As Psalm 46 declares, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations." He allowed your stillness to echo louder than their noise. I remember a dear friend of mine who worked in a powerful legal firm. She was soft-spoken, diligent, always willing to serve. But her excellence exposed mediocrity, and when she didn't play their politics, they labeled her difficult. They isolated her, talked behind her back, and tried to discredit her. But she never retaliated. Instead, she leaned into prayer and kept her peace. Months later, she was promoted to partner, while those who schemed were either fired or forgotten. Her story reminded me that God honors silence rooted in faith. Your silence, chosen one, has been prophetic. Why? Because silence is not emptiness, it's sacred space. A space where God reveals what noise tries to bury. And haven't you seen it? While you stood still, masks fell. Hearts were exposed. People revealed their true intentions, not because you fought, but because you didn't. It reminds me of Ecclesiastes 3:7, which says there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. You're not silent because you're afraid. You're silent because you're aligned. And the betrayal? It wasn't a failure, it was a filter. It filtered out those who couldn't carry your calling into the next dimension. Could it be that God allowed the betrayal so you wouldn't bring counterfeits into your promised land? There's a holy shift happening now. The whispers that once tried to bury you are becoming the very soil that births God's glory. Isn't it amazing how God takes what was meant for evil and turns it for good? Just like he did with Joseph, whose brothers sold him, but whose position saved a nation. Or like Haman, who built gallows for Mordecai, only to be hanged on them himself. When God steps in, he reverses the weapon. What does that mean for you? It means you don't need revenge. Your hands don't need to grip a sword. They need to stay lifted in worship. It means you don't need explanations, because fruit will speak for you. As Matthew 7:20 says, "By their fruit you will recognize them." Your peace will silence every accusation. Your consistency will erase every lie. Your rise will not be for show. It will be divine confirmation. And here's what will shock the ones who tried to break you. The victory will not just be a win. It will be a revelation. A revelation that humility still matters. That silence can be stronger than slander. That God still defends the pure in heart. Blessed are you, for as Jesus said in Matthew 5:10-11, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven." So what if this whole season wasn't punishment, but preparation? What if your silence wasn't passive, but prophetic? What if your restraint wasn't weakness, but worship? Let the world see now what God already knew all along. Your story isn't about revenge. It's about revelation. Chosen one, have you ever paused in the silence and asked yourself, why did everything just stop? One moment you were surrounded by voices, messages, plans, and opportunities, and the next it felt like the whole world just disappeared. No more calls, no more invitations, no more applause. Did it feel like rejection, like the world moved on without you? But what if that silence wasn't punishment, but prophecy in motion? This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't abandonment. It was divine concealment. You weren't being pushed aside. You were being protected. God knew that your value was far too great to be left exposed before the right moment. Think about it. Rare treasures are never left out in the open. They're sealed, hidden, kept under watch until the time of unveiling. Could it be that heaven was guarding you the entire time? Before Moses ever stood before Pharaoh, he was hidden in a basket and laid among the reeds by the river. That moment described in the book of Exodus wasn't just about escaping Pharaoh's decree. It was a prophetic act to preserve a deliverer before his destiny could be destroyed. Can you see it now? God didn't take you out of the spotlight to forget you. He withdrew you from noise so he could refine you in silence. He didn't demote you. He covered you. And that covering wasn't passive. While others raced to be seen, you were being formed in secret. While some chased after platforms, you were being stripped of pride, clothed in discernment, and trained for a battle far greater than you imagined. What looked like isolation was divine insulation. What felt like delay was sacred preparation. Have you considered that maybe God wasn't hiding you from the world, but hiding the world from you? Exposure before preparation is dangerous. Look around at those who rushed into fame, influence, or even marriage before they were whole. How many of them cracked under the weight of being seen too soon? Purpose without foundation becomes pressure, and pressure without character becomes collapse. That's why God let those plans fall apart. That's why the relationship ended. That's why the door slammed shut. It wasn't failure, it was foresight. David was never introduced to Israel in royal robes. He was called in from the field smelling of sheep, with nothing but a slingshot and a heart after God. Before he stood on the battlefield, he stood in the secret place. Before he carried a crown, he carried obedience. Can you feel how your journey echoes his? How your seasons in the wilderness weren't wasted but written by heaven? I remember watching the story of Viola Davis unfold, how she spent years in obscurity, facing rejection after rejection, typecasted and overlooked. But in the silence, her talent matured, and when God opened the right door, her rise was undeniable. It wasn't her hustle that made her shine, it was her becoming. The same is true for you. You weren't inactive, you were being activated from within. Even Jesus wasn't rushed. Before his public ministry began, he was hidden for 30 years. 30 years of silence, of formation, of building unseen. And even when he was baptized, the Father didn't say, "This is my powerful miracle worker." He said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Identity was affirmed before purpose was performed. So what if the silence was sacred? What if the hidden years were the most holy of all? You feel it now, don't you? That deep stirring in your spirit, a whisper that feels like thunder in your bones, the sound of heaven's footsteps approaching. The unveiling is near. But here's the miracle. You don't need to force your way forward. You don't need to demand to be seen. The God who hid you is the same God who will reveal you. And he's already declared over you, "Stand back, I'm taking over this fight." Let the world ask where you've been. Let them wonder. Because when heaven brings you forward, no voice, no opinion, no rumor, no system can deny the victory. What is birthed in the secret place cannot be destroyed in public. Isaiah 49 says, "In the shadow of his hand he hid me. He made me into a polished arrow and concealed me in his quiver." You, chosen one, were never forgotten. You were being sharpened in God's quiver. And now, he's pulling you out, not just to be seen, but to hit the target with power and precision. Your moment isn't just coming, it's being announced, quietly, powerfully, and no one can stop what God himself has prepared in the dark for the light. They misunderstood your silence, didn't they? They thought it meant surrender, that your quiet was proof you had nothing left to give. They saw your withdrawal and labeled it weakness. But what they never witnessed was the holy fire burning behind the veil, the private place where God was molding a warrior, not with noise but with purpose. What looked like stillness was actually divine strategy. You weren't being sidelined, you were being summoned into the sacred. Chosen one, the reason God told you to step back wasn't because you were unqualified to fight. It was because he needed to train you in a realm they couldn't access. Not in front of crowds, not in the noise of validation, but in the hidden places where applause fades and identity is forged in stillness. Can you remember the moment you stopped craving attention and started craving alignment? When affirmation no longer fed you and only his presence could satisfy you. This wasn't punishment, it was preparation. And preparation, though unseen, is often the most anointed part of the process. What if the silence wasn't heaven ignoring you, but heaven insulating you? Think of David, not as king, not as warrior, but as a fugitive hiding in the cave of Adullam. That's where God hid him from Saul. And yet in that cave, something sacred was happening. He was being stripped of people-pleasing and crowned with purpose. He was no longer a shepherd boy hoping to be recognized. He was a leader being refined by isolation. Could it be that your cave moments have been just as holy? If God hadn't pulled you into the quiet, would you have stayed in places that only half valued your calling? Would you have settled for comfort and sacrificed your mantle just to maintain connection? That's why he lets certain people leave without closure. That's why the plans unraveled without warning. He wasn't trying to crush your spirit. He was trying to protect your oil. Your anointing was too precious to be poured into leaky vessels. I remember hearing the testimony of a woman who trained for the Olympics. She said her greatest victories weren't won on the track, but in the dark, unseen hours of brutal preparation, when no one was watching. It's in the same way that heaven has been preparing you, training you in the shadows, so that when you're revealed, you won't just show up, you'll shift atmospheres. Have you felt it lately, that stirring deep in your spirit, the sense that something is moving, that what was once dormant is awakening, that the time of your pouring is near? Isaiah declared it long ago. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. That word isn't just beautiful, it's burning with divine timing. You're not just being called forward, you're being launched. And when God lifts you, he won't hold a vote. He won't consult your critics or check with your past. Heaven doesn't negotiate before moving. His elevation doesn't come with a press release. When he moves, it silences every doubt. Have you ever considered how often God advances people without explaining a thing? He didn't ask Pharaoh's permission before exalting Joseph. He didn't warn Jezebel before taking Elijah up in a whirlwind. And he's not waiting for consensus before releasing you. The same people who asked, "Where have you been?" will soon be asking, "How did you rise like that?" And the answer won't be found in popularity. It will be rooted in pain, in patience, and in the purity of your pursuit. Don't despise the cave. Don't resent the shadows. That's where your discernment was sharpened. That's where your motives were purged. That's where your voice stopped echoing culture and started echoing heaven. That's why when God now says, "Stand back," it's not because you're too fragile for the battle. It's because the war belongs to him and your preparation is already complete. You're not stepping into this next season seeking applause. You're stepping in as a carrier of divine assignment. And when you move, the earth will feel it. Because, chosen one, you weren't just hidden. You were heaven-trained. Like Paul in Arabia, like Gideon in the winepress, like John the Baptist in the wilderness. And now, just like them, you're ready. You heard them, didn't you? Every lie wrapped in a smile. Every false version of you passed around like gossip was a game. You felt the sting, not just of being misrepresented, but of being completely misunderstood by people you once loved. And here's the part that cut the deepest. You had the truth. You held it quietly in your hands, and yet God didn't let you speak it. Why? Why would he let you stay silent while the lies shouted? Because he was preparing to speak for you. Chosen one, what if the slander wasn't meant to shame you, but to shape you? What if the betrayal wasn't a blow, but a blessing in disguise? That may sound strange, even cruel, but I've seen it now in my own life, more than once. And I've learned that what feels like abandonment is often divine promotion in disguise. There was a season where I too watched everything fall apart. People I trusted suddenly shifted. Whispers started. My name began surfacing in conversations I never stepped into and always painted wrong. And just like you, I burned with the urge to defend myself. I wanted to correct them, prove them wrong, confront the twisting of my story. But God said, "Stand back." At first I was frustrated. I thought silence meant I was weak, but it wasn't weakness. It was a weapon. God's way of building something deeper in me than public approval, inner strength. I didn't know it then, but I was undergoing something spiritual, something prophetic. And you are too. Every accusation you endured became resistance training for your spirit. Every unfair assumption about you carved out more room for humility, for patience, for supernatural peace. You weren't just being silenced, you were being fortified. Doesn't it make sense now why Paul said in Romans that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope? It's a pattern you'll see all through Scripture. Hannah, crying bitter tears before the Lord, accused of being drunk while praying her soul out. Daniel, sentenced to lions for doing what was right. And Jesus, spotless and pure, tried by false witnesses and crucified by those he came to save. None of them deserved the accusations, but each of them rose higher after them. It's the divine formula. Accusation precedes elevation. Why? Because God doesn't waste pain, He transforms it. And can we be honest? Sometimes vindication takes longer than we'd like. Sometimes we look up at the sky and ask, Lord, are you seeing this? But He is. And not only is He seeing it, He's writing it all down. Psalm 135 doesn't say He might vindicate His people. It says He will. That's not a guess, it's a guarantee. You've passed a test most people fail. Not by retaliating, but by resisting. By keeping your heart clean while the rumors ran wild. That's rare. That's holy. And that's exactly the kind of spirit God raises up for His greatest assignments. I once met a man who was quietly removed from his leadership position due to gossip. For years he remained silent, never retaliating, never defending. And when God restored him, publicly and powerfully, he said something that stayed with me. The silence didn't just save me from bitterness. It saved me from becoming someone I was never meant to be. That's your story too. You're not just being protected, you're being preserved. So when God told you to be still, it wasn't to suffocate your voice. It was to secure your legacy. Every lie, every whisper, every betrayal is being melted down and recast into the very crown you'll wear, the crown of one who endured quietly, trusted deeply, and rose unexpectedly. And when you rise, because you will rise, it won't look like revenge. It'll look like radiance. God's justice doesn't thunder. It glows. And when He steps in, those who tried to destroy you won't have the words to respond. Not because they're ashamed, but because they'll be in awe. Because what God's about to do in you will leave them speechless. Heaven didn't just hear what they said about you, it recorded it. Every careless word, every slander wrapped in a smile, every room where your name was spoken without honor, it's all been written into the divine scrolls. Nothing slipped past God's awareness. And while you stood there, confused and heartbroken, asking yourself where it all went wrong, when all you ever did was love sincerely, God whispered gently in your spirit, "Stand back. I saw everything, and now I'm going to fight for you." Have you ever felt like the verdict was handed down before you even opened your mouth? Like they'd already written the ending of your story before they took the time to read your heart? You tried to explain yourself. You tried to show them who you truly are, but they were too committed to their version of you, and the silence you gave them. They mistook it for guilt. But here's something I had to learn myself. God never asked me to defend my name. He asked me to trust His. Because vindication from man is temporary, but when heaven speaks, it rewrites the narrative forever. The prophet Malachi once declared that a book of remembrance was written in heaven for those who feared the Lord and honored His name. That includes you. Your name has been etched into those pages, not just your victories, but your wounds. Every time you forgave when you could have lashed out, every moment you chose mercy over retaliation, every tear that fell in the dark while you kept blessing others in the light, those weren't forgotten. They were filed in glory. I've been there. I remember a time when someone I trusted deeply spread lies about me behind closed doors. I found out later, after the damage was already done. I wanted to scream. I wanted to prove myself. But I felt the Spirit of God say, "Don't touch it. I'm writing something better." And He did. What followed was a season of unexpected favor, open doors I never chased, and healing I didn't think I'd receive. Looking back, I see it now. If I had responded, I might have ruined what God was about to reveal. You felt invisible in the process, but heaven never lost sight of you. God saw the dagger behind their handshake. He heard the laughter at your expense. He witnessed the betrayal sealed with a hug. And while they were busy constructing false stories, he was crafting your next chapter. They were spreading rumors, but he was orchestrating revelation. Why didn't God act sooner? Why didn't he strike the moment they lied? Because God doesn't react out of emotion. He moves in perfect strategy. If he had exposed the lies too early, it might have wrecked your peace. If he had stepped in prematurely, you would have missed the lesson and the strength he was developing in the silence. God doesn't rush. He refines, and refinement is always more powerful than revenge. Think of Daniel again, thrown into the lion's den after being set up by envious men. He didn't beg, he didn't retaliate, he trusted. And it was the king, not Daniel, who stood the next morning in awe of God's protection. That's your future. Not just survival, but public confirmation. What if your silence now is setting up your spotlight later? And it's not just Daniel. Remember Job, stripped of everything, slandered even by friends, but in the end God restored him double. Or Jesus, who stood silent as false witnesses accused him, yet rose in resurrection power days later. What if God is using their false stories as the soil where he's about to plant your harvest? I once read the story of a teacher who was falsely accused by a parent at the school board. She remained silent, never fought back. Years later, that same parent had to apply for a job, and guess who sat on the panel reviewing their application? That teacher. But she didn't repay evil with evil. She extended grace. That moment spoke louder than any defense ever could. So, chosen one, don't waste your strength trying to erase their fiction. Let God write your sequel. When he steps in, he doesn't just restore your name, he elevates your entire life. And when that moment comes, and it will, it won't look like vengeance. It will look like grace wrapped in glory. Let them talk. Let them twist. Let them whisper your name in the shadows, because heaven is about to speak louder than every lie. And when the records are opened, even your silence will roar. Even your scars will shine. Why? Because while they misjudged you, God was preparing you. You're not stepping into vindication with bitterness. You're stepping in clothed in brilliance. And the same voices that tried to write you off, they'll be left speechless, not in regret, but in reverence. Because when God fights for you, no one can question the victory. The table is being set, but not by your hands, and not on your timeline. It's being arranged by the very one who once whispered into the storm of your soul, "Stand back, I'm about to fight for you." You see, that silence you've been walking through, it wasn't rejection, it wasn't heaven forgetting your name. It was a holy strategy, a divine recalibration. While it felt like everything around you had gone still, God was actually clearing the battlefield, making room for the kind of victory that couldn't be confused with coincidence. Have you noticed how quiet it's been? How conversations stopped without warning? How some people just faded, and certain doors that once seemed wide open suddenly closed? What if that silence wasn't punishment, but protection? What if heaven has been building something behind the curtain, something so sacred, only stillness could protect it until the unveiling? Chosen one, don't misread this silence as heaven going silent on you. It's quite the opposite. This quietness is what it sounds like when angels march, when spiritual furniture is being rearranged. Ecclesiastes declares that God makes everything beautiful in its time. And that time, it's brushing right up against your now. Have you ever considered that the delays weren't delays at all, but divine positioning? That every no you faced was actually a redirection, a pulling away from counterfeit opportunity so that only pure destiny could remain. There's a moment I'll never forget. A woman I once mentored shared how she had just lost her job. Her friends grew distant, and she was left in this deep, almost suffocating silence. But during that time, God was orchestrating something bigger. Months later, she received a once-in-a-lifetime role working with a global non-profit, one she hadn't even applied for. The hiring team said her name just kept coming up. She walked into her calling, not by networking, not by striving, but by waiting. That silence wasn't failure, it was favor forming. You've lived through something similar. While others mocked your pause, heaven was preparing your platform. Every tear that slid down your face in confusion, it wasn't ignored, it was collected by heaven, and each one carried weight. Psalm 56 says, God keeps your tears in a bottle, none are wasted. Every delay has been a soldier moving into place. Every closed door was God saying, not this one, I have better. Behind the scenes, heaven has not been silent. It's been busy setting a table not for some secret reconciliation, but for a public restoration. Just as Mephibosheth, crippled, forgotten and hiding, was brought to the king's table because of a covenant he didn't earn, so are you being summoned not out of pity, but out of promise. His invitation wasn't about his brokenness, it was about David's loyalty to Jonathan. And in your life, it's not about perfection, it's about covenant. Covenant always remembers what pain makes us forget. You're not being restored because you impressed people. You're being restored because you refused to quit. You didn't manipulate your way forward. You didn't shout over your enemies. You stood when you had every reason to flee. And that stance was noticed. You waited when ambition told you to push. You held your peace while storms raged. And while it seemed like nothing was happening, God was aligning voices who will speak into your destiny, not against it. Can you feel it now? That the silence wasn't the absence of God. It was the presence of strategy. It was the spiritual scaffolding for a throne you didn't know you were being fitted for. That stillness was never wasted. That delay was never denial. It was divine preservation. Because some seasons are so holy, they must be hidden before they are revealed. And this is not about revenge. It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about redemption at the highest level. This is the moment when God takes your history and rewrites it into glory. The table you're walking into isn't just a seat at someone else's party. It's your seat in your appointed place with your name written by the King's own hand. Just like Joseph, who was pulled out of prison and into the palace in a single day, not because he forced his way in, but because God said, now. Just like Esther, who waited silently until the moment came to speak, and when she did, a nation was saved. So too are you being positioned in silence for a moment, so loud the earth will shake. And when you sit at that table, when you rise into the space they said you'd never reach, you'll realize something sacred. God didn't just prepare the table, he prepared you to sit at it. The ones who laughed at your stillness, they'll now witness your rising. And when they ask, how did this happen? There will be no human explanation that makes sense, because it wasn't hustle, it wasn't hype, it was him. So don't panic if the silence lingers. That's what it looks like when God clears the battlefield. That's what it feels like when heaven is preparing to crown his chosen one. You're not just being defended, you're being anointed. You're not just being restored, you're being revealed. You thought the silence meant God had forgotten you, that maybe the closed doors were signs of divine delay, or worse, divine dismissal. But what if the silence wasn't neglect? What if it was the sound of heaven drawing its sword, preparing for war, not against you, but for you? You've walked through seasons that felt like shadows. There were no spotlights, no applause. You served while others were seen. You prayed while others promoted themselves. And still, heaven seemed quiet. Didn't you wonder, was it all for nothing? Why would God give you a vision and then lead you into a wilderness? Why show you the key, yet keep the door shut? Why hide you when you were ready to be revealed? Chosen one, the silence wasn't absence. It was protection. It was preparation. God wasn't ignoring you. He was insulating you from battles that weren't meant for your hands. How many spiritual wars did you avoid simply because God said, "Stand back"? How many unseen attacks did he block while you questioned his timing? I once heard the story of a musician, talented, anointed, but unknown. While others chased fame, he spent years playing in small churches, writing songs in secret, with no record label, no marketing, no connections. Many told him he was wasting his gift, but he stayed faithful. And then, in a single week, one of his songs went viral, not by strategy, but by grace. Doors flew open, nations sang his words. And when asked how it happened, he simply said, "I didn't make it happen. God did." That's what your moment will feel like grace cracked open the sky. You've carried vision without visibility. You've walked with prophetic dreams and promises that no one else understood. You've served in shadows while others took the spotlight. But don't confuse hiddenness with insignificance. The wilderness wasn't a tomb, it was a womb. It was the place where obedience grew roots, and your obedience has not been overlooked. It has summoned the armies of heaven. Remember Moses. For 40 years he wandered in Midian, a fugitive turned shepherd. He had fire in his spirit but no stage, purpose in his heart but no platform. Yet when God's timing arrived, Moses didn't have to beg for position. God sent him with fire in his hands and authority on his lips. What if that's where you are now, on the edge of a divine calling that's been waiting for the right hour to be born? Isaiah prophesied that the nations would see your vindication and kings would behold your glory. God is preparing to reintroduce you, not as the wounded version of your past, but with a name only he can speak over you. Can you imagine that moment, when those who walked away will have no choice but to witness your rising? You didn't manipulate your way into this. You didn't hustle or scheme. You simply obeyed. And because of that, this next door will be unmistakably divine. No one will be able to say, "They earned this." They'll only be able to say, "Surely the Lord has done this." Your pain once spoke louder than your peace, but that's about to reverse. The stillness that once felt like isolation will now glow like evidence, evidence that you surrendered, even when surrender was silent. Evidence that you trusted God, even when trust felt like letting go of everything you could control. David once wrote in Psalm 118 that what the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone, and he didn't say it might be the Lord's doing. He declared, "This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." You're not stepping into spotlight. You're stepping into a divine war room where God himself is fighting on your behalf. This is not just vindication, it's revelation, a holy unveiling, not to prove your worth, but to reveal his glory. So if it still feels quiet, if the doors remain unopened just a little longer, don't panic. Stillness is the signature of heaven's strategy, and when God moves, he doesn't need noise, he just needs timing. Yours has arrived. Stand still, chosen one. Watch closely. He's not just defending your name, he's getting ready to crown it. Now that the battle is turning in your favor, now that God is shifting what once stood against you, how will you walk? Will you move forward with fists clenched for revenge, or will you carry yourself like a vessel of grace, protected under divine justice? What posture will you choose now that heaven has chosen to honor you? Chosen one, the shift is undeniable. You can sense it. The very tables you were once excluded from are being overturned by the hand of God. But this isn't your cue to clap back. This is your holy instruction to step back. Let God finish what only He could have started. Let Him write the ending in His voice, not yours. You've waited in silence. You've endured the weight of misunderstanding, the sting of being unseen, the ache of being judged for wounds no one else had to carry. And now, justice is rising. But as vindication shines like the morning sun, God is still watching you. He's not just delivering victory, He's testing how you'll carry it. Will you meet favor with forgiveness or bitterness? Will your heart echo heaven's mercy or the world's revenge? Isaiah once said that the Lord is a God of justice, and blessed are all who wait for Him. And you waited. You didn't scheme. You didn't retaliate. You trusted. But here's the truth. Blessing always brings choice. Will you let grace guide this new season? Revenge is easy when the wound is fresh, but grace is what flows when healing has truly happened. Remember Joseph, when his brothers stood before him, men who betrayed him, stripped him of freedom, nearly ended his life. He didn't raise his voice. He raised his eyes. He embraced them and said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." What kind of strength does it take to bless those who broke you? That's not weakness. That's divine identity revealed. That same strength lives in you. You've grown through your silence. Not every injustice requires an answer. Not every betrayal needs a response. Why? Because your life now speaks louder than your words. God is already shifting the hearts of those who once stood against you. He's already using your stillness to shout His glory. I think of Tyler Perry, once homeless, sleeping in his car, mocked for pursuing plays no one attended. He was laughed at, overlooked, discredited, but instead of returning insult for insult, he stayed faithful. He kept writing. He forgave. Today, the very industry that rejected him now honors him. And what's more powerful, he didn't use his rise to retaliate. He used it to redeem others. That's what grace looks like when it grows up. Personally, I've found that my greatest strength isn't proven by what I can say, but by what I choose not to say. When I let God defend me instead of defending myself, peace follows me like a shadow. And every time I've withheld retaliation, I've seen God do more with my silence than I ever could with 1,000 arguments. Scripture reminds us in Romans, do not take revenge, but leave room for God's wrath. That's not just a warning, it's a promise. God's justice completes what human hands can't. When He fights for you, He restores, reverses, and reveals all in one move. So when they expect your anger, surprise them with your peace. When they anticipate vengeance, let them encounter wisdom. Because your healing isn't seen just in your success. It's seen in how gently you carry that success. Will you use your platform to prove them wrong or to reveal God's heart? You don't need to settle old scores. Your life already is. The glow around you now isn't pride, it's proof. Proof that grace shaped you, that the silence didn't destroy you, it developed you. That God didn't just change your situation, He transformed your soul. So walk forward, not because they apologized, but because you've outgrown the need for one. This isn't just a comeback, it's a crowning, and the crown belongs not to the loudest, but to the one who stood silently when standing cost everything. Let humility be your armor. Let peace wave before you like a banner. They may remember what they did, but they will never deny what God has done. And you? You'll look back with a full heart. Because the most powerful kind of revenge is rising with such grace that the world has no choice but to say, only God could have done this. Now that heaven has spoken and your spirit has received this word, not just in your ears but in your bones, what will you do with it? Will it live as a fleeting inspiration or rise within you as divine instruction? This isn't just a comforting message. This is a heavenly activation, wrapped in fire, sealed with purpose, and backed by the armies of the Lord. You've survived too much. endured too many silent storms, cried too many unseen tears to walk casually now. Every sleepless night when you begged God for direction, every unanswered text, every door slammed in your face, every moment you questioned whether your prayers reached the sky, it wasn't wasted, not a second of it. You were never wandering aimlessly. God was training your hands for war, as Psalm 144 says, even when you only felt exhaustion. You weren't kept alive to tell a tragic story. You were preserved to embody the victory others thought was impossible, to walk in rooms they never imagined you'd enter, to become the testimony that someone else's faith is hanging on. You were chosen not to compete, but to complete a purpose that's older than your pain. You were chosen to build beauty where others saw rubble, to carry mercy in a world obsessed with performance, and to shine where shame once tried to extinguish your light. But hear this clearly. What you've just received is not just confirmation of who you are, it's a commission for where you're going. God is not just affirming your identity, He is assigning your movement. He's sending you back into your daily life with the strategy of a general and the humility of a servant. Can you walk into the same rooms with new eyes? Can you meet familiar faces with a redeemed heart? Will your posture now reflect grace instead of guardedness? In your relationships, will you serve rather than perform? In your workplace, will you show character rather than chase credit? Will you still walk like God is beside you when no one is applauding? Even David, after being anointed by the prophet Samuel, went back to tending sheep in obscurity before he ever held a crown. Can you remain faithful in the shadows, trusting that heaven keeps score even when earth forgets your name? And if you feel the temptation to prove yourself now, to speak louder, to fight back, to show them how wrong they were, pause. Remember, your silence is no longer self-defense, it's spiritual strategy. Your fruit will speak what your mouth doesn't have to. Your peace will disrupt their assumptions, and your life will preach sermons that echo beyond the reach of words. I think of Keanu Reeves, not because of fame, but because of his quiet walk through loss and misunderstanding. He lost his partner, his child, and faced years of being labeled aloof and distant. But he kept showing up, with kindness, with humility, with an undistracted spirit. He didn't defend his pain. He let his life whisper healing. His restraint became his radiance, and that's what your life will become, not noise, but evidence. I've learned that real strength doesn't make a scene, it makes an impact. The boldest thing you can do sometimes is bless someone who hurt you, stay silent when provoked, or choose the harder yes when comfort begs you to shrink. I've seen God do more with obedience in the dark than I ever accomplished with performance in the light. So this week, do something bold, something that reflects the truth you now carry. Bless the one who bruised you, not to comfort them, but to free yourself. Speak words of hope in the same place where shame used to scream. Turn down the opportunity that flatters your ego, but compromises your purpose. Sow a seed in secret and let heaven reward it publicly. Get still again, still enough to hear God's voice again. He's still speaking, and your next step isn't random, it's a weapon in His hand. You're no longer a fractured version of who you were. That broken shell has been buried. What stands now is a healed warrior, not because the battle got easier, but because you finally let God fight it for you. So when you move now, move with the quiet confidence of someone heaven defends. Don't move to be noticed, move to bring glory. Let your stillness carry weight. Let your choices carry anointing. Let your peace become a banner over every room you enter. You are the evidence, the answer, the walking sign of a prayer someone else is still whispering. You're not just surviving anymore, you're rising. And with each intentional, obedient step forward, you're moving deeper into a battlefield already cleared by heaven. Because the fight was never yours to begin with. It belongs to the one who said, "Stand back, I'm about to fight for you." Now that you've been commissioned, not just inspired. How do you begin again? Not with noise, not with haste, but with holy intention. You don't need a spotlight to prove you've been changed. The real evidence will be found in your rhythm, in how you carry the sacred within the ordinary. Because chosen one, your next chapter won't be built by force. It will be built by alignment. Not everyone will understand how quiet your rise will be, but that's because this isn't a performance. It's a procession, a divine unfolding that begins in your posture long before it's seen in your platform. Will you pray with deeper urgency, even when you feel dry? Will you honor the room you're in, even if it's not the one you prayed for? Can you wash the feet of others, even as God prepares your crown? Remember Jesus. On the night before his greatest victory, he knelt with a towel, not a throne. He washed the feet of friends who would soon run away. He chose humility, knowing full well that all authority in heaven and on earth had already been given to him. What kind of king does that? The kind who wins battles heaven's way. So now, as you return to your routine, whether it's behind a desk, caring for children, showing up to a place that doesn't yet see your anointing, do it like royalty disguised as a servant. Heaven never needed your fame. It needed your faithfulness. And here's something to carry with you. Your next miracle will not look like magic. It will look like momentum. Quiet, consistent, spirit-led momentum. One obedient step at a time. God is not in a rush to make you famous. He's determined to make you fruitful. That's why you don't need to announce the shift. Your life already is. The light is coming back into your eyes. The weight is lifting from your shoulders. And people will look again and ask, "What changed?" And you'll smile. Not because of what you did, but because of what God is doing through you in silence. And make no mistake, the enemy sees it too. That's why the warfare feels different now. It's not always loud. It's subtle. Distractions, draining conversations, unseen tension. But now you're not who you used to be. Now you discern the difference between an invitation and an attack. You know how to retreat into prayer instead of reacting in pride. This is what spiritual maturity looks like. Less noise, more clarity. Fewer arguments, more authority. And it all begins in the secret place. Will you meet him there again tomorrow? Will you guard your mornings like they're battlefields? Because they are. Will you walk into meetings, phone calls, and assignments like someone sent by heaven, not just scheduled by man? Your daily obedience is where power grows, and power that comes from intimacy with God cannot be manipulated, duplicated, or stolen. So step gently, but with weight. Speak less, but with fire. Love harder, but with wisdom. And when the time comes for heaven to move through you, publicly, it won't be your strength the world sees. It will be God's fingerprints all over your life. Now that the storm has passed and your spirit has been sharpened in silence, you're not just called to rise, you're called to lead. But this leadership doesn't look like the world's version. It doesn't come with shouting, control, or titles. It comes with a towel in one hand and fire in the other. You lead not because you wanted power, but because you survived the crushing that gave you authority. Chosen one, when God brings you out of battle, he doesn't just hand you a reward, he hands you responsibility. And responsibility always starts in the inner life. Are you still kneeling before you're leading? Are you still depending before you're deciding? This is where many fall. They celebrate the victory but forget the oil came through pressing. But you're different, because you know now what was meant to kill you became the fire that crowned you. Think about Elijah. After calling down fire from heaven and defeating the prophets of Baal, he didn't immediately step into comfort. He fled into the wilderness, broken, burned out. But it was there, in the stillness, that God whispered again. Not in the earthquake, not in the fire, not in the wind, but in a still, small voice. That whisper didn't weaken Elijah, it recommissioned him. He rose from that place not just as a prophet, but as a reformer. You too are being called to rise, not for applause but for impact, not to prove your strength but to reflect His. You don't need to wear the scars to show you've survived. The wisdom in your eyes now speaks louder than the wounds ever could. And don't be surprised when God asks you to lead in the same places that once rejected you. Don't shrink back when He sends you to people who once misunderstood your silence. That's what restoration looks like. It's not just personal, it's redemptive. It rewrites the room. But before you walk into those rooms, ask yourself, will I lead with the same compassion I wished others had shown me? Will I extend grace to those who once turned their back? Because heaven promotes not based on performance, but on posture. Even Jesus, after His resurrection, didn't return with fury. He didn't appear before Pilate or Herod to demand acknowledgement. He appeared to Mary, to the disciples, to the doubters. He restored, He fed, He walked. Why? Because true authority serves before it shines. This is what sets you apart. You don't need to flex your strength, you carry it. You don't need to dominate rooms, you shift them simply by showing up. And when people ask, what changed? The answer won't be found in a resume or a spotlight. It will be found in your rhythm, your discipline, your presence. You became what they never saw coming. So here's your new assignment. Build. Build what was once broken. Build in places others fled from. Build bridges with the wisdom pain gave you. Build altars where the enemy tried to leave ashes. Don't just rebuild your life. Help others rebuild theirs. Because now, chosen one, you're not just healed, you're dangerous. You're dangerous to darkness, dangerous to pride, dangerous to spiritual apathy, because you carry clarity. You walk in truth. You know who you are now, and most importantly, you know who fights for you. You are not stepping into leadership by accident. You were trained for this in the shadows. So, take your place, quietly, boldly, humbly, and as you move, don't forget this. The most powerful leaders are the ones who remember what it felt like to be led by God in silence. Now that you've stepped into leadership, now that the weight of your assignment is resting on your shoulders like a mantle, the question is, can you carry this calling in the day-to-day? Not just on the mountaintop, but in the hallway. Not just when you're seen, but especially when you're not. Are you prepared to live with consistent integrity, even when the miracle becomes the mundane? Because here's the truth no one tells you. Being chosen is not a title, it's a lifestyle. And chosen ones don't just rise once, they rise daily, in silence, in private, in traffic, in tension, in decision-making when no one's watching. Are you willing to live prophetically in the ordinary? Can you remain aligned with heaven, even while surrounded by the distractions of earth? Can you maintain purity of intention when attention finally comes? This is where many fall, because they confuse elevation with exemption. But elevation only increases the responsibility. And now, your response matters more than ever. Jesus said in Luke 12, "To whom much is given, much will be required." You've been given something sacred, not just favor, but responsibility. So how will you treat the people who can do nothing for you? How will you speak when no one's recording? How will you move when no one else is applauding? Take time to examine your daily rhythm. Not everything that calls your name is worthy of your energy. Not every opportunity is an open door. Some are distractions dressed as destiny. The enemy is subtle now. He knows he couldn't destroy you with pain, so he'll try to detour you with applause. That's why your secret life matters more than your public one. Are you still guarding your time with God? Are you feeding your spirit before you feed the algorithm? Are you still letting Him correct you before anyone else can praise you? I think of Denzel Washington, not just for his craft, but for his consistency. For decades, he's chosen roles and projects that align with his convictions. He's spoken openly about keeping God first, about resisting the pull of fame to preserve his soul. Even when the world applauded him, he stayed grounded. He's proof that public favor can coexist with private faithfulness if you stay aligned. Personally, I've learned the hard way that favor can elevate you faster than your character is ready for, and that's dangerous, because what the spotlight exposes, the secret place must sustain. That's why God had to hide you first. He wasn't denying you, he was developing you. So here's what walking in alignment might look like now. Declining meetings that feel good to your ego, but wrong in your spirit. Turning off your phone to sit with God before sitting with people. Responding to criticism with peace instead of panic. Honoring the Sabbath like your future depends on it, because it does. Choosing what's right, not what's trending. And when things begin to accelerate, and they will you have the discernment to slow down internally? Speed is not always proof of success. Sometimes the real power is in your pause, in your prayer, in your no. David said in Psalm 16, "I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken." This is your blueprint now. Let God go before you in every move, every meeting, every message. Let his presence be the loudest voice in the room, even when your name is on the door. Because, chosen one, this isn't about performance, it's about posture. This isn't about staying impressive, it's about staying anchored. You are now carrying something far more powerful than just breakthrough. You're carrying blueprint. Your obedience is a roadmap for someone else's deliverance. Your peace is the permission someone needs to believe again. Your decisions, your discipline, your daily alignment, it's bigger than you now. So take your place, quietly and faithfully. Don't try to be viral, be valid. Don't try to be loud, be led. Don't chase momentum, chase his presence. Because the world doesn't need another icon, it needs an example. Now that you're no longer just living for restoration, but walking in responsibility, chosen one, it's time to look ahead, because this isn't just about your story anymore, it's about your legacy. The choices you make now are writing the script for people you may never meet. Your faith is building a bridge for someone else's breakthrough. Have you considered this? That your obedience today is becoming the inheritance someone else will stand on tomorrow. That your consistency, when no one applauded, when no one understood, is planting seeds for a future harvest your children or your spiritual lineage will reap. What if the tears you cried in silence are watering the soil for a legacy you'll never fully see? Can you live with that kind of vision? Can you endure not just for victory, but for generational impact? Abraham never lived to see all the promises God made to him fulfilled. But because he believed, even when it made no sense, his obedience birthed a lineage of covenant. Hebrews says Abraham looked forward to a city whose architect and builder is God. His faith built something eternal. Can you imagine believing so deeply in what God whispered that you walk even when the reward might not be in your lifetime? And let's not forget Ruth, a Moabite widow with no guarantee of restoration, who chose covenant over comfort. She followed Naomi into a land not her own. No fame, no fortune, just faith. And what did God do? He placed her in the bloodline of Jesus. A woman forgotten by culture became a cornerstone in the lineage of salvation. This is what legacy looks like. It's built in the margins, in the unseen sacrifices, in the quiet yes when the world says no one will notice. I think of someone like Stephen Curry, not just as an athlete, but as a man of faith who lives it out consistently. He honors God on and off the court, and because of that alignment, he's not just influencing fans, he's shaping a generation. Young athletes don't just mimic his shooting form, they model his character, his humility, his faith. That's legacy. And it's not just built by being the best, it's built by being anchored. Legacy isn't what people remember about you, it's what heaven builds through you. And chosen one, your legacy is already in motion. Every time you chose forgiveness over offense, every time you sowed in private, helped in secret, prayed for someone who didn't even know you were interceding, those moments were not wasted. They are eternal architecture. Personally, I've come to see that the most significant moments of impact in my life haven't come from stages or spotlights or recognition. They came when I chose integrity over approval, when I showed up for people who couldn't repay me, when I forgave without an apology. Those quiet moments, God turned them into pillars, and now others are standing on what obedience built. So what will you build, chosen one? Will your home be a sanctuary, not just a structure? Will your relationships reflect covenant, not convenience? Will your daily decisions be guided by legacy, not likes? The next time you feel like quitting, remember, someone is watching your endurance as proof that it's possible to survive and shine. Someone's future is being molded by your present obedience. Someone's deliverance is tied to your discipline. Someone's healing may begin the moment you decide not to give up. Let your life echo with meaning beyond the moment. Let your choices be so aligned with heaven that long after you're gone, the fruit still speaks. Proverbs says, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." That inheritance isn't just wealth, it's wisdom, it's reputation, it's spiritual covering. It's a name that opens doors because of the integrity it's tied to. And remember, you're not just building a legacy for those who know you. You're becoming the evidence that someone else prayed for. You are the proof that pain doesn't have to become poison, that obedience still works, that silence can be sacred, that God's chosen can walk through fire and come out refined, not ruined. So, walk like your steps echo, speak like your words carry weight, love like someone's heart depends on it, and lead like your life is the blueprint God will use for generations to come. Now that the crown is within reach, now that the doors are opening and your name is being spoken in rooms you once only dreamed of, how will you walk? Will you let the crown become your identity, or will you wear it with the humility of one who remembers who placed it there? Chosen one, don't forget this. The God who fought the battle didn't just fight to elevate you, he fought to entrust you. What he gives is not for applause, it's for assignment, and the greatest danger of success is forgetting the stillness that birthed it. Will the platform now make you louder or softer? Will promotion draw you closer to God or distract you from the one who got you here? These are the questions that separate the chosen from the crowd, because not everyone who receives favor knows how to carry it. But you've been trained in the fire. You've been refined by the silence. That silence wasn't just protection, it was preparation. Remember King Saul, anointed, chosen, positioned, yet when pressure came, he chose performance over obedience. One rushed sacrifice cost him the throne. Why? Because he forgot that being crowned doesn't mean God stops watching posture. But David, who was anointed but overlooked, kept his heart aligned in obscurity. Even when he had the chance to kill Saul, he chose restraint. And God said of David, "I have found a man after my own heart." Now the test is yours. Can you steward success like someone who remembers the cave? When you're offered attention that flatters your pride, will you choose the path that protects your purpose? When influence grows, will your prayer life grow with it, or shrink under the weight of busyness? These are sacred tensions only the anointed will feel. I think of someone like Viola Davis, a woman who rose from poverty and trauma into global acclaim, and yet she consistently credits her strength, her discernment, and her grounding to her relationship with God. She speaks not just with authority, but with depth, because she hasn't forgotten what shaped her. She leads with compassion, because she remembers what it feels like to be unseen. That's legacy led well. That's what heaven trusts. I've learned that the more God elevates you, the more fiercely you must guard your altar. The invitations become more frequent, the compliments come quicker, but your peace will only stay intact if your posture stays low. Because God never asked you to carry the crown alone. He simply asked you to carry it without losing the cross. Let your prayer life now become your strongest room. Don't let influence crowd out intimacy. You don't need to pray louder. You need to go deeper. This season requires revelation, not reaction, strategy, not striving. The throne is not a finish line. It's a new battlefield. The Bible says in Deuteronomy 8:18, "Remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth." Don't forget who gave you the breath, the vision, the opportunity, the wisdom. Because the more heaven pours into you, the more heaven expects you to pour it back. Let your conversations carry healing. Let your presence shift rooms, not just for influence, but for heaven. Let every open door become an altar, every decision a declaration. God still sits on the throne, not me. And if people begin to applaud your glow, redirect the light. Let them see the scars under your crown. Let them know it wasn't talent, it was trust, that this crown was handed to someone who almost didn't make it. Someone who chose prayer over pride, stillness over vengeance, purpose over platform. This is your stewardship season, and heaven is watching how you handle what you prayed for. Will you serve it, or will you let it serve you? Will you return to the secret place with even more desperation than before? Because the higher you go, the more your foundation must deepen. Don't let the noise become your compass. Stay anchored to the whisper. Stay sensitive to correction. Stay in step with the Spirit, even when the crowd cheers for something else. Because this right here is what the fight was always for. Not for a crown you could hold in your hand, but for the character that could hold it in your heart. Now that the dust has settled and the crown rests on your head, what will you do to protect the clarity God has given you? Because elevation is not the end of the battle, it's the beginning of a new one. You were once fighting to survive. Now you're fighting to stay sensitive. And spiritual sensitivity is harder to maintain when the battlefield goes quiet. Chosen one, you didn't just win a fight. You inherited a frequency, a deeper connection with God, a sharpened ability to sense when something is off, when His voice is near, and when the Spirit is grieving. But that gift is fragile. It can be dulled by distraction, distorted by performance, or drowned in applause. Will you fight to keep it sharp? Can you still discern His whisper when the crowd is calling your name? Can you still retreat into silence when the opportunities feel endless? What if the real test of your growth isn't in how you respond to rejection, but in how you manage attention? Samson had strength, but he lost sensitivity. He played too long with the enemy's voice and grew numb to God's. Delilah didn't defeat him with a sword. She wore down his discernment. And by the time he noticed, his hair was gone and heaven had gone quiet. This is what the enemy wants to do with you now. He couldn't take you out with warfare, so he'll try to wear you down with noise. Can you recognize the sound of a subtle spiritual trap disguised as opportunity? Can you walk away from connections that feel good to your flesh but cloud your spirit? Jesus constantly withdrew to lonely places to pray, not because he was weak, but because he was wise. Even at the height of his influence, he protected his sensitivity like it was sacred. Are you willing to do the same? I think of Lauren Daigle. She reached global fame almost overnight. Her voice was everywhere. Her name was on charts, awards, headlines. But instead of chasing popularity, she paused. She stepped back to be still. She chose spiritual clarity over cultural noise. She turned down interviews to sit with God. That's not normal in the world's eyes, but it's kingdom living. And that's why her voice still carries anointing, not just talent. Personally, I've learned that when my spirit feels cluttered, it's not because God stopped speaking. It's because I let too many other voices in. I let busyness drown intimacy. I let responsibility replace relationship. But every time I return to silence, I find him again, waiting, whispering, reminding me who I am without the noise. So how do you stay sensitive in this new season? Do you stay quiet long enough to notice when your peace starts slipping? You stop scrolling when you feel your joy leaking? You pause conversations that feel heavy on your spirit? You decline invitations when your soul says no, even if your mind says yes? You protect your mornings like they're altars. You guard your nights like they're gates. You get comfortable saying, "Let me pray on it," instead of, "I'll think about it," because your clarity is not casual, it's consecrated. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." This isn't a poetic idea, it's a spiritual survival strategy. Your sensitivity is the compass of your calling. Lose it, and you wander. Protect it, and you flourish. So set boundaries, not to keep people out, but to keep heaven close. Fast, not for performance, but for purity. Pray, not to be seen, but to stay sane. Rest, not because you're lazy, but because obedience without stillness leads to burnout. You were chosen not just to lead, but to listen, not just to speak, but to hear what others miss. And in a world filled with noise, imitation, filters, and half-truths, you're now the voice that carries heaven's echo. So don't dilute it. Don't let ambition outrun alignment. Don't trade your discernment for distraction. You paid too high a price to lose your frequency now. Let the world chase noise. You protect the whisper. Because that whisper, the one that said, "Stand back, I'm taking over this fight," is the same whisper that will guide you into every next victory. So now, chosen one, what more is left to say? You've stood in silence while heaven strategized. You've wept in hidden places while God positioned angels in your defense. And now, as the dust begins to clear, you realize something deep in your soul. This was never your battle to begin with. It was God's. And he never lost control, not for a second. You were called not to retaliate, but to release. Not to prove, but to position yourself. And through it all, your greatest weapon wasn't your words, it was your obedience. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was wisdom wrapped in surrender. In today's world where everyone is shouting to be heard, where revenge is glorified and ego is marketed as confidence, your posture stands out. You chose stillness, you chose grace. And because of that, heaven is now making noise on your behalf. The same God who whispered, "Stand back, I'm taking over this fight," is now shouting your victory for all to see. I say this not just as someone delivering a message, but as someone who's lived it. I've watched doors close that I thought were mine. I've been misunderstood, overlooked, underestimated. But every time I stayed silent when my flesh wanted to shout, God moved. Every time I stood back when I wanted to fix it myself, he proved he was already ahead of me, and he's ahead of you too. So now, walk like someone heaven defends, rest like someone the King has claimed. Move forward, not because the path is easy, but because the one who walks with you is undefeated. If this message spoke to your spirit, I invite you to share what part resonated with you most in the comments. Type 777 below. If you're ready to stand back and let God fight for you, let this be your declaration of trust, your surrender in faith. And if you feel led to support this channel through Super Thanks, know that your gift, big or small, is deeply appreciated. But whether you give or not, thank you for being here, for watching, for listening, for walking this journey with us. Your presence matters more than you know. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share this word with someone who may be in the middle of their silent battle right now. You never know whose breakthrough your obedience might unlock. May God go before you. May his angels surround you. May his justice rise for you. And may his voice forever whisper, "This one belongs to me. Stand back, I'm fighting for them." You are not forgotten. You are not finished. You are chosen, and the battle is